right, so here we go. Daniel chapter 7, beginning with verse 9. I watched till thrones were put in place, and the Ancient of Days was seated. His garment was white as snow, and the hair of his head was like pure wool. His throne was a fiery flame, its wheels a burning fire. A fiery stream issued and came forth from before him. 1,000 thousands ministered to him. 10,000 times 10,000 stood before him. The court was seated, and the books were opened. I watched then because of the sound of the pompous words which the horn was speaking. I watched till the beast was slain, and its body destroyed and given to the burning flame. As for the rest of the beasts, they had their dominion taken away, yet their lives were prolonged for a season and a time. I was watching in the night visions, and behold, one like the Son of Man, coming with the clouds of heaven. He came to the Ancient of Days, and they brought him near before him. To him was given dominion and glory and a kingdom, that all peoples, nations, and languages should serve him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion, which shall not pass away, and his kingdom, the one which shall not be destroyed. What a great passage. Pull this out of my thing here. Okay, I gave you a really thick handout. And at the beginning of it, it says the Jewish Gospels, the story of the Jewish Christ. And what I did was this book here is chapter 2. That's what you have, chapter 2, the whole chapter. I gave you the whole chapter. Okay, this is the book. And I want to focus tonight, at least we may get beyond this, but I want to focus on this word, this phrase, the Son of Man. Who is he? That's correct. So Daniel Bayarin is a Talmudic scholar. You're going to be shocked how, sometimes we'll say, how could they say that? And how could he not be a believer? You're going to have, and I don't have answers for you other than the Lord hasn't. I don't have an answer for you, because you're going to see things in what he's going to say. They're going to blow you away. You will leave this room knowing a lot of theology, more than pretty much any pastor that you'll ever meet. I'm serious when it comes to understanding what this phrase, the Son of Man, means. And what he does with this is remarkable. I will say that book is readable. I brought another book with me that is his, that I read when I was at the King. It's called Borderlines, the Partition of Judeo-Christianity. Borderlines, as in developing the border between Judaism and Christianity. This is a challenging read, but it's one of the most wow books I've ever read. And I have a second paper that I'll probably get to present to you tonight or today that's really from that. And again, and he'll actually make the point in that book. This is a remarkable point. He will say until the 6th century, you could not distinguish, you could not say that Christianity and Judaism were two separate religions until the 6th century. Put that in context. This is, what's the year? 2025. Go back 600 years. Go back 500 years, 6th century. You're in the time of Martin Luther. What he's saying is it took that long before you could actually say these two religions were actually distinct. So the book, that thicker book I showed you, is actually about how these two religions became two, right, and not one. And until then, Christianity really was a sect completely within Judaism. That long. Okay, so this book, The Jewish Gospels, the story of the Jewish Christ, written by a Jewish man who does not believe in Yeshua. And I highlighted passages, and I'm going to just walk you through what I highlighted and probably make some comments as I go through it. And times I won't make comments, but I will. I pulled out what's to make the point so you get what does this phrase, Son of Man, mean. Okay, here we go. On page 25 is where we're going to pick it up. Does everybody have a copy? Anybody need a copy? Does anybody need a copy? Put those hands. Could if you just leave your hand up, thanks, Whitney. And Whitney's going to go grab some. Here we go, and she'll pass them around. And here we go. On page 25, you can see where I've highlighted then. Most Christians today, he's not a Christian. Most Christians today, if they have thought about it at all, would think that by this title, Son of Man, Jesus' human nature is being designated, while the title Son of God refers to his divine nature. In fact, let me just interject here. When I still have credentials with a Christian denomination, the Assemblies of God, and I'm the vice president of their National Jewish Fellowship. When I was getting credentialed, they give a test, right, to get licensed, to get ordained. And one of the questions on the test, this is 1993. Okay, I've been credentialed a little while. And one of the questions on the test, basically what they wanted you to say was that the phrase, the Son of Man, refers to Jesus' humanity, and that the phrase Son of God refers to his divinity. Okay, that was the question. That was the answer. Here we go, back to the paper. Okay, while the Son of God refers to his divine nature. This was indeed the interpretation of most of the fathers of the church. A new Bible translation called the Common English Bible has gone so far as to translate Son of Man as the human one. In this chapter, I will show that almost the opposite was the case of the Gospel of Mark. Son of God referred to the King of Israel, the earthly king of David's seat, while Son of Man referred to a heavenly figure and not a human being at all. That's why I said you're going to know some theology that others are just not. He's going to make the point, this phrase, Son of Man, is not about humanity in the Gospel of Mark at all. Okay, and this phrase, Son of Man, throughout the Bible, you're going to be challenged, really, what does it really mean? The title Son of Man denoted Jesus as a part of God, while the title Son of God indicated his status as King Messiah. Down to the page a little. The reason that the king was called the Messiah was because he was literally anointed with oil at the time of his accession to the kingdom. One of the best examples of this enthronement ceremony is to be found in the book of Samuel. Then Samuel took the vial of oil and poured it upon his head and kissed him and said, "Is it not that Adonai," that's the tetragrammaton, that's the unpronounceable name that the Jewish people will never say except once a year on Yom Kippur. Is it not to say that we just say Adonai instead of what it actually says? Is it not to say that Adonai has anointed you to be prince over his inheritance? That word anointed is the verb mashach, which is the verb of the noun form Mashiach, which appears, I think, it's 37 times in the entire Tanakh in the Old Bible, and it just means it's the word for Messiah. Okay, and of the 37 times, in 34 of them, it is impossible to make that word mean anything other than a normal human being that can die, and that it has no attachment to what we think of when we think of the Messiah. And in fact, it won't go into this in the document here, the reason that Jesus is qualified to be our Savior is because he was fully human. It is his humanity that qualifies him to be Messiah, not his divinity. He died for us before him. See the point there? Okay, so let's go over to page 31. And I didn't highlight it But you will, in the middle, the Son of Man as divine Redeemer. And he writes in there, this will probably come up in a little while, that the book of Daniel was written circa 161 BC. Okay, so in other words, just a little context. He is a person who believes in what we call the late dating of Daniel. He is saying that the book of Daniel is written during the 2nd century BC. As conservative Christians, we believe, most conservative, not all, but most conservative Christians will say Daniel is not written in the 2nd century BC. It's written in the 6th century BC, much earlier. But he, and it might be helpful for you to know that, is saying this book is actually written. He's not denying that it belongs in the Bible. He's not at all. He believes this is God's word. But like a lot of people in the scholarly world believe that Daniel was written in the 2nd century BC. I believe in the earlier date. Okay, that could become important. Bottom of page 31 then. In this remarkable text, we find the prophet Daniel. I'm going to read a little bit now. Having a vision in which there are two divine figures. One who is depicted as an old man, an ancient of days, sitting on the throne. We have been told, however, that there is more than one throne there. And sure enough, a second divine figure in form, like a human being, who is brought on the clouds of heaven and invested by the Ancient of Days in a ceremony very much like the passing of the torch from an elder king to younger in ancient Near Eastern royal ceremonial, and the passing of the torch from the older gods to the younger ones in their myths. He's saying this is a lot like what you'll read in other stuff. This idea of an older god passing things on to the younger god. Okay. Then what he does, he quotes Daniel 7:13. I saw in the vision of the night, and behold, with the clouds of heaven, there came one like the Son of Man, and came to the Ancient of Days, and stood before him, and brought him close to him, was given rulership and the glory of the kingdom, and all people, nations, peoples, and languages will worship him. His rulership is eternal, which will not pass, and his kingship will not be destroyed. We can begin to see here a notion about redemption that is quite different from the expectation of the restoration of a Davidic king on the throne of Jerusalem. He said this is very different than just restoring the kingdom to David's descendants. He's not saying it doesn't include that. He's not saying it doesn't include that. He's saying this is so much beyond that, is what he's saying. What this text projects is a divine figure, God. This is a Jew saying this, who does not believe in Jesus. What this text projects is a divine figure to whom will be given eternal dominion of the entire world, of a restored entire world, in which this eternal king's guidance and rule will be in accord and completely and finally with the will of the Ancient of Days as well. In fact, in 1 Corinthians chapter 15, verse 28, it says that Jesus, everything is going to be put under Jesus' feet, and then he will turn it over to the Father. So Paul is pulling on this. That's 1 Corinthians 15, 28. He says, although this Redeemer figure is not called the Messiah, the name in Daniel 7, he's not called Messiah. Okay? The name for him will have to, the name of Messiah, will have to wait for later reflections on this Danielic vision, as we shall see below. It brings us close to at least some of the crucial characteristics of the figure named later the Messiah or the Christ. Now, you know the word Christ is just the Greek word for the Hebrew word Messiah. They mean the same thing. We think Jesus Christ is identifying that human being, that person, Jesus. But actually the word Christ does not necessarily, we know it's him. We know he's the Christ. But just because you have the word Christ doesn't mean you mean necessarily Jesus. You got the picture, okay? He says, so it brings us close to at least some of the crucial characteristics of the figure who is later going to be called the Messiah or the Christ. What are these characteristics? He is divine. He is in human form. He may very well be portrayed as a younger appearing divinity than the Ancient of Days. He will be enthroned on high. He will be given power and dominion, even sovereignty on earth. All these are characteristics of Jesus, the Christ, as he will appear in the Gospels. And they appear in this text more than a century and a half before the birth of Jesus. Now, he's late dating Daniel. So I would say it's not just a century and a half before Jesus. It's 5 centuries before Jesus. Moreover, they have been further developed within Jewish traditions between the book of Daniel and the Gospels. In other words, between the time Daniel wrote it, whether it be 5th century BC, 6th century BC, or 2nd century, it gets developed way beyond that. Daniel's the one that introduces this idea, but it just gets developed within Judaism. At a certain point, these traditions became merged in Jewish minds with the expectation of a return of a Davidic king, and the idea of a divine human Messiah was born. This figure was then named Son of Man, alluding to his origins in the divine figure named one like a Son of Man, a human being in Daniel. In other words, a simile, a God who looks like a human being, literally Son of Man, has become the name for that God who is now called Son of Man, a reference to his human appearing divinity. Okay, we're going to jump over now to page. If anybody has any questions, you can let me know, but we're going to jump ahead to page 35. When Jesus came and walked around Galilee, proclaiming himself to be the Son of Man, you got to get this. No one ever asked, what is a Son of Man anyway? Nobody asked that question. He's making the point, let me tell you what every human being on the planet understood what the word Son of Man meant. Okay? Now, Jews today are not going to go here, but there were no Jews that didn't go here for centuries. Okay? They knew what he was talking about, whether they believed his claim or not. Much as modern folks in many parts of the world would understand someone saying, I am the Messiah. Somebody says, I'm the Messiah. You know what he's saying. Well, somebody said, I'm the Son of God. He's saying every person who ever heard of Judaism knew what that he was saying. That's his point. And he's going to explain what it is that they all knew he was saying and what he actually meant when he said it 83 times in the Gospels. Going over to page 37. Mark 14, 61 and 62. The high priest asks of Jesus, are you the Messiah? That is, are you the Christ, the Son of the Blessed? And Jesus said, I am. And you will see the Son of Man seated at the right hand of power and coming with the clouds of heaven. You can see what he's asked. Are you the Son of God? And his answer is, well, duh, I'm the Son of Man. The idea that the phrase Son of Man then in Mark means anything other than divinity at all in that verse is absurd, is what Daniel Bayarin is saying. There's 83 times that he claims to be the Son of Man. What Daniel Bayarin's point is, that's 83 times that Jesus is saying, I am God. That's what he's saying. That's his point. Go over to page 38, please. In Daniel 7, we find the following account of the prophet's night dream. I'll read it again. Why not? As I watched, thrones were set in place, and an ancient one took his throne. His clothing was white as snow, and the hair of his head like pure wool. His throne was fiery flames, and its wheels were burning fire. A stream of fire issued and flowed out from his presence. By the way, before I just read on, let me just interject. You'll notice the wheels with the flames and the fire, because that's in Ezekiel, right? That's chapter 1. That's chapter 10. I'll come back to that in a moment. He doesn't go into Ezekiel in this, but I'll come to it. Okay. A stream of fire issued and flowed from his presence. 1,000 thousands served him, and 10,000 times 10,000 stood attending him. The court sat in judgment, and the books were opened. As I watched in the night visions, I saw one like a son of man, a human being, with the clouds of heaven. And he came to the Ancient One and was presented before him. To him was given dominion and glory and kingship, that all peoples, nations, and languages should serve him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion that shall not pass away, and his kingship is one that shall never be destroyed. In this prophetic narrative, we see two divine figures. One who is clearly marked as an ancient, and one who has the appearance of a young human being. The younger one has his own throne. That's why there is more than one throne set up to start with. Now, we looked at this, how many thrones, and we pointed out that there's 24 thrones around the throne in Revelation, and it says this. So, and people have different views. Walvoord agrees with what he's saying here. Walvoord says the thrones represent the Trinity. Let me just point out before I go on. He will coin the word binitarianism in this book. Okay, now we all know what the word Trinity means. Okay, binitarianism means two-part God. Okay, Trinity means three-part God. He makes the point in his writing in that book and this book, especially in that book. He makes a strong case, and I'll probably get there today, for binitarianism. The idea of there being a third part in the Godhead, the Holy Spirit, is never an issue for Jews. If you can get a Jew to believe there's two, God the Father, God the Son, you'll have no problem with the third. Like, there's no issue there at all. Okay, the issue is getting them to accept the second, binitarianism. Okay, so he will use this phrase, binitarianism. You'll see it in some, because I read this many years ago. You'll see the word binitarianism that I hand wrote in some places because I had already read this book, and that'll help you. So, in this prophetic narrative on page 39, we see two divine figures: one who's clearly marked as an ancient, and one who has the appearance of a younger human being. The younger one has his own throne. That's why there is more than one throne set up to start with. And he is invested by the older one with dominion, glory, and kingship over all the peoples of the world. Not only that, but it will be an eternal kingdom forever and ever. You can see I wrote the word lesser Adonai next to it, and that'll come up in a little while. Please. Right, to us, and even if you don't even believe, even if you're not a believer, you know what we mean when we say Messiah. You know. See your question? Back then, they believe that the Messiah will be human and not divine. Jews today believe Messiah will be completely human and not divine. That's Jewish theology today. Universal. That's Jewish theology. They don't see the word. He will be a great king who will bring peace to the planet. That's Jewish theology. So this is reaching back 2,000 years. I like going back there. If you come to a Seder that I do, then you will probably notice that I give very little attention to the cup of Elijah, because it didn't exist when Jesus walked the earth. That's 500 years later. Okay, it's a beautiful thing. It's wonderful, but he never saw it. Okay, it's later theology. I'm not saying it's a bad thing to do. It just didn't exist. Okay, it might be as early as 200 AD, but the best evidence is 500 AD. Okay, so I give, sometimes I joke, and like in our house when we do a Seder, and if we have guests, we'll have a table and we have a chair over in the corner so we don't have to take space at the table. I'll say, that's Elijah's seat. He was a bad boy. He can't sit at the table. All right, here we go. Back. So did I answer your question? And can you remind me of your name, please? Eric? Aaron, Moses' brother. Awesome. Thank you. Okay, so we're going to go over to page 40 now. We spent a lot on clouds, and we'll end up back on this clouds with the Son of Man. Maybe not today, but certainly by the next time we meet, this clouds. The act of coming with clouds suggests a theophany. That's God, an appearance of God. The act of coming with clouds suggests the theophany of Adonai himself. And Daniel 7:13, if Daniel 7:13 does not refer to a divine being, then it is the only exception out of about 70 passages in the Old Testament. The idea of God sitting in the clouds and coming with the clouds, he's saying there's about 70 of these. If you're going to say that Daniel 7:13 is not talking about a divine being, you're saying this is the only place out of 70. Okay. No Jew was wondering about this when Jesus said, I'm the Son of Man. They knew what he was saying. That's why they wanted to kill him. Not everybody, but that's why some wanted to kill him. That's the reason right there. Okay, a little farther down. This, in effect, means that Daniel 7 knows of two divinities, the head of days and the Son of Man. Those two divinities, in the course of time, would end up being the first two persons of the Trinity. This is a Jewish person explaining this. Okay, let's go over to page 43. The theological controversy that we think that exists between Jews and Christians was already an intra-Jewish controversy long before Jesus. His point, that's the point of that book right there, this idea that there are two people in the Godhead is nowhere near new with the coming of Jesus. It was already a big part of Judaism. And he explains it there, but he'll explain it here as well. Okay, going over to page 44. I'm not going to do the first one, the second highlight. The Messiah Christ existed as a Jewish idea long before the baby Jesus was born in Nazareth. That is, the idea of a second God as viceroy to God the Father is one of the oldest of theological ideas in Israel. The idea of binitarianism, he's saying, is one of the oldest ideas in Judaism. No, I was just showing that you would have to go back that far to get the 6th century. What he will say is it's about AD 600 when the church and Judaism became separate. And the issue was some of the things that Pope Gregory, good name, Pope Gregory the Great, that part of it's good, Pope Gregory the Great did in 604 AD when he became Pope. And that's the issue that finally was the big kahuna. Yes and no, because he will make the point in this book that there are, in Orthodox traditional Jewish prayers, there are prayers in Judaism that are making use of binitarianism in the Middle Ages. You're talking 13, 14, 1500 AD. So he's a Jew who's just being honest with what Judaism has done historically. Does he believe in Jesus? No. But that's what this book does. Anybody read this book? Anybody here ever read it? It's kind of a little bit of a hard read. There's another book that he wrote that I would honestly say is the single hardest book I've ever read. I will not recommend it to anybody. It's called Paul, a Radical Jew. He explains in the book that he learned Greek so that he could read Galatians. And he coins these words throughout the whole book, and like you can't find them. You can look in dictionaries, you can look up the words. They're just not in anything. And because he'll take a word, he'll create it half of Greek and half of Hebrew and half of English, and he'll just mix them up, and he makes these words up. And like there's one line on page 16. I've read this line like 100 times to people. I said, I do not have a clue what he is saying in this sentence. It's on page 16. I've read it 100 times because I'm making fun of it. I have no clue what he's saying. It's the hardest book I've ever read. Yeah. No, I haven't. But you know what? I used his stuff in 2016. I used that book in a sermon here. And about a year or two later, I noticed Dr. Rudolph used it as well for a sermon here. Tathe? I think you're adding more to it than what he's doing. He is simply using the word binitarianism to show that there is this theology of a two-part Godhead, okay? And he calls that binitarianism. Maybe he got it from somewhere else, I don't know. But he calls it binitarianism, this idea of a two-part Godhead. And he's saying that that theology existed long before Jesus. And in fact, we'll see, you can find that theology directly in Torah, like right in it. So, did I see another hand? No, both divine. Both divine. The only thing that Jesus is, that he's admitting, is this idea that he is divine, but he's taken upon human form. But he's divine. Okay, that's what he's saying. Okay, so that quote on page 44 is really amazing. Let's go over to page 47. The identification of the rider on the clouds with one like a son of man in Daniel provides that name and image of the Son of Man in the Gospels as well. It follows that the ideas about God that we identify as Christian. Now he's saying that we Jews, it follows that the idea that this God that we Jews identify as Christian, what they say, are not innovations. Christianity isn't the place where this started. They're not innovations, but may be deeply connected with some of the most ancient Israelite ideas about God. These ideas, at the very least, go back to an entirely plausible and attested reading of Daniel 7. In other words, it's a legitimate way to read Daniel, that there's two gods in that passage. He doesn't believe Jesus is one, but he's saying it's a very legitimate, completely honest, accurate reading of Daniel. That's what he's saying. And thus to the 2nd century BC, because remember, he late dates the book. So I would say thus to the 6th century BC at the latest. And they may be even older than that. And I think the reason why he says it may be older than that is because I think it's his way of alluding to the fact that it's possible that the book is actually written much earlier. Okay. Going over to page 50. The young God in the original mythic text in Daniel is the figure who will redeem Israel and the world, not an exalted Davidic king. It's part of the binitarianism, the binitarian God, if you will, the lesser Yahweh, I should have said his name, the lesser God. He's the real Redeemer. That's what he's saying. But I would say, but he's got to be human because he dies for our sin. So that's why the Messiah is really significant. There is, as I have argued, nothing in this vision that suggests or even allows seeing the one like a son of man as being an actual human being. He said, if you're going to say the person in Daniel 7 is an actual human being, you are being dishonest to the text. This is a Jew writing to Jewish people. Going over to page 51. The general outlines of theology as a young God subordinated to an old God are present in the throne vision of Daniel 7. And actually, as I look at that, I think of I wrote it in the margins for you. John 14:28, the Lord said, I'm going to the Father, for my Father is greater than I am. So like Jesus is just pulling off of this. And Bayarn's point is, Jesus is doing this intentionally. That's Jesus' point. Believe him or not, but that is his point. Going over to page 53. How the Jews came to believe that Jesus was God. Now, before I even read this, let me just point this out. Until you get to Acts chapter 10 with Cornelius, who's a Gentile leaning into Judaism, there's no such thing as Gentiles who believe in the Christian message. None. Not one on the planet. The entire early church was only Jewish. By the time you get to Acts 15, you're like in AD 47. They're trying to deal with, do we even let Christian Gentiles in? What do they have to do? Do they have to be circumcised? The council at Jerusalem, they say, yes, we can let them in. They don't have to be circumcised. They don't have to follow all the Torah. That's Acts 15. So way before that, in Acts 21, verse 12, I think or Acts 21, verse 21, the rest of the apostles say to Paul, you know, there's myriads of Jews who believe. The word myriads is plural. The Greek word is myrios. It actually means 10,000. But the fact that it's plural, what the Greek actually says in Acts 21 is that there are tens of thousands of Jews in just the city of Jerusalem who believe that Jesus is Messiah and divinity. By the time you get to Acts 21, the idea that the Jews rejected Jesus is baloney, total baloney. What's true is there was an ad hoc committee of people in the Sanhedrin who met in the middle of the night because they never could have convicted him during the day. So they excluded people that would have not voted with him, like Joseph of Arimathea and Nicodemus, who were both on the Sanhedrin, because Jews were accepting Jesus in mass. But there was a politically correct group. Do we know about politically correct groups in our country? There was a politically correct group that went after him. If you think the Jews rejected Jesus and now the Gentiles have accepted him, do you think most Gentiles accept Jesus? Okay, that whole idea is just baloney. See the point there? What's true is this political leadership of Israel met in the middle of the night, and what they did then allowed the gospel to go to the whole world. That's an accurate portrayal of what really happened. Okay, so page 53. How the Jews came to believe that Jesus was God. If all the Jews, or even a substantial number, expected that the Messiah would be divine as well as human, then the belief in Jesus as God is not the point of departure on which some new religion came into being, but simply another variant, and not a deviant one, of Judaism. It's just another reason why the two separated. That's one of the borders that developed as the borderlines were forming. And he'll make the point in his book, Borderlines, that there were these sects with the Judaism. And, for example, the first break, the first birth pain that happened within Judaism was the Jews who said, I'm one that believes in the second person, this binitarian, and I'm one that doesn't. And Jews began to distinguish themselves, but they're still all Jews. So when John writes his gospel, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God, John is saying, I'm one of those that say there is two. That's John's point. This is the first birth pain. But until you get to the 6th century, there's just not enough birth pains to say that's really two different religions. So he says, if all the Jews, or even a substantial number, expected that the Messiah would be divine as well as human, then the belief in Jesus as God is not the point of departure on which some new religion came into being, but simply another variant, and not a deviant one, of Judaism. As controversial a statement as this may seem, it must first be understood in the context of a broader debate about the origins of the divinity of Jesus. A little farther down. In the 5th century, for instance, great controversy about whether Jesus had one human nature and one divine nature, or one combined divine human nature, was called the Christological controversy. Now that, everything in that little highlight there, he's talking about within the church. There's within the church, almost entirely Gentile at this point, there's this debate. Did Jesus have one human nature and one divine nature, or was it a combined divine human nature? The church is divided, not Judaism. The church is dealing with this question. Nicaea is 325, so that would be the 4th century, so this would be before that. Nicaea is an interesting thing because when Constantine called Nicaea, this is a huge issue, he disinvited all of the Jewish bishops, so that at that point the church became completely Gentile-led. And he said things like, if you celebrate Passover, we will, instead of Easter, we will kill you. If you celebrate the Sabbath on Saturday instead of Sunday, we will kill you. Nicaea did some really good things, fully God, fully man, that statement, but it also did some absolutely horrible things. Okay, so a little farther down on the bottom of page 53, this is kind of important. Was Jesus divine from birth, or an ordinary human later adopted by God and made divine? So you can see he's asking the question that the church was dealing with. And let me just point out, you can see I even wrote in there on page 82, see the Enoch discussion. We're going to come back. When we come back, we'll come back to page 56. But before we do that, you have in your handout a pink piece of paper. It's in the same thing you're holding. It's just a pink piece of paper. Find the pink paper. Okay? Y'all find it? Y'all see it? Red, pink, okay. Okay, what you're looking at here is whatever color that is. Salmon color. This thing. There's really no other option because, you know. All right, so here, so this is out of the same book. This is page 82 in the book, and I think you'll find this interesting, and it will be helpful. It says, and Enoch was with God, the apotheosis of Enoch. That's a word most of us are probably not real familiar with, so I put the definition of it next to it. The elevation of a person to the rank of God. Okay, so we're going to go back and forth between this pink, salmon, red, and what he just said on page 53. Was Jesus divine from birth, or an ordinary human later adopted by God and made divine? What he is going to say in his book is Enoch becomes divine. And here's how he will do that, just so you know. I also gave you some green handouts at the end of that. Let me tell you what, we're not going to look at the green handouts. They're there for you who want it, but I'll tell you what you've got. Okay, the first part of that, the first 2 pages of that, is actually the actual book of Enoch, chapters 70 and 71. And then in that green paper, pages 3, 4, 5, and 6 are actually notes, like if you had a study Bible, notes from another book. It's called Notes on the Book of Enoch, so that will help you understand what he's saying. Now, here's the point. We all know Enoch, Genesis chapter 5, he walked with God and was not, for God took him. So Genesis chapter 5 tells us that happened. Okay, so he calls this the apotheosis, or the elevation of Enoch to godlike status. Now, hold on. Let me explain this before I take any questions, because we'll get off. Okay, so that's what he's going to say. that Enoch becomes this because but what we understand, that's his theology. What we understand is he doesn't become God, but he is taken up to heaven. But that's not the way he's going to go with it. Okay? Recognizing that, it is kind of interesting that where do you find the phrase Son of Man? Like, you find it in places like where it's just referred, it is just referring to like in the Psalms, you know, why do you care for the Son of Man? Psalm 2, right? So you'll find, but that's not referring to a person. See the difference there? You find a person being called the Son of Man in Daniel 7:13. You find Enoch being called the Son of Man throughout the book of Enoch. He's actually called that. And you find Ezekiel called the Son of Man 93 times, I think it is. Ezekiel, like Enoch, is caught up to heaven. In Ezekiel, if you're taking notes, in Ezekiel chapter 8, verse 3, he is actually caught up to heaven. He also has visions of heaven. Daniel is not called the Son of Man. Daniel sees the Son of Man. Daniel has visions of the Son of Man. Enoch is called up to heaven, and he is called the Son of Man. Okay? Enoch doesn't belong in our Bibles. Absolutely not. But he is called the Son of Man in that book. But Ezekiel does belong in our Bibles, and he is called the Son of Man. So I've given some thought on why would this be? And here's my take on that. There is this elevation of humanity. Don't you know that we will judge the angels? Don't you know that you are seated with him in the heavenly places? We are going to be elevated. Humanity is a whole lot more significant than you have considered, than any human being has considered. You will judge the angels. So this phrase, Son of Man, I think is a phrase that not only does it appear it's Jesus, but it also seems to fit the idea of this image of God that is within people. So that when Ezekiel is called up, therefore he is now called the Son of Man 93 times. And Enoch, who is called up, is the Son of Man. And when we see him, when we see Jesus, we shall be like him, for we shall see him as he is. And there is this almost, and I don't know, okay, you understand, like when we explained the word Elohim and how it can mean the one God, but it also is used much broader? Okay, I'm going to suggest to you that if we understand this distinction, then you should be open to the idea, the possibility. You'll never be God like God is God. But you could be divine. The image of God is already in you. You will never be omniscient, omnipresent, omnipotent, the creator of all things. That ain't going to happen. But there is something about his divine nature that is in with humanity, and eye hath not seen nor ear heard, neither has entered into the heart of man the things that he has prepared for us. There is something about humanity that is far beyond anything we could imagine. He who sheds the blood of man, by man shall his blood be shed, for in the image of God was man created. You kill Adolf Hitler, and you have killed the image of God, the fallen image, but it is in every human being. And those who go to heaven are going to get something. So I think his point here, going back to page 53 on the bottom, is very interesting. But now we're going to jump over to page 56. The blasphemy of the Son of Man. The reasons that many Jews came to believe that Jesus was divine was because they were already expecting that the Messiah Christ would be a God-man. In other words, this is not new. Jesus is not the one who said, hey, by the way, there's going to be a God-man. Paul's not the one who said, oh, you know, a lot of times liberal, crazy liberal Christian theologians say Paul's the one that created Christianity. I want to say, grow a theological brain. That's not true. This existed way before Jesus walked the earth. That's a Jewish person who doesn't even believe in Jesus is saying this. Okay? The reasons that many Jews came to believe that Jesus was divine was because they were already expecting that the Messiah Christ would be a God-man. This expectation was part and parcel. Parcel means it was delivered. Part and parcel of Jewish tradition. The Jews had learned this by careful reading of the book of Daniel and understanding its visions and revelations as a prophecy of what would happen at the end of time. In that book, as we have just seen, the young divine figure is given sovereignty and made ruler of the world forever. I want to show that Jesus saw himself as the divine Son of Man. And I will do so by explaining a couple of difficult passages in the second chapter of the Gospel of Mark. In Mark 2, verses 5 through 10, we read the following. And when Jesus saw their faith, he said to the paralytic, "My son, your sins are forgiven." Now some of the scribes were sitting there, questioning in their hearts, "Why does this man speak thus? It is blasphemy. Who can forgive sins except the one God?" And immediately Jesus, perceiving in his spirit that they thus questioned within themselves, said to them, "Why do you question thus in your hearts? Which is easier to say to the paralytic, 'Your sins are forgiven,' or to say, 'Rise, take up your pallet and walk'? But that you may know that the Son of Man has authority on earth to forgive sins," he said to the paralytic. "But that you may know that the Son of Man has authority on earth to forgive sins." The Son of Man has authority, obviously delegated by God, to do God's work of the forgiving of sins on earth. This claim, by the way, and Jesus also told us, whatever sins we remit, image of God. This claim is derived from Daniel 7:14, in which we read that one like the Son of Man has been given authority, glory, kingship. Indeed, an authority that is eternal, that will not pass away. The term that we conventionally translate as authority in its New Testament context, exousia is the Greek word there, is exactly the same term that translates the Aramaic word sholtan in the Septuagint, namely sovereignty or dominion. That is what Jesus is claiming for the Son of Man, is exactly what has been granted to the one like the Son of Man in Daniel. He's saying Daniel has said the Son of Man has authority. I have authority. Jesus rests his claim on the ancient text quite directly. According to this tradition, then, Jesus claims to be the Son of Man to whom divine authority on earth under heaven has been delegated. The sovereign, moreover, is the one who has the power to declare exceptions to the law. I don't think he understands what Jesus did when he makes because Jesus didn't make any exceptions to the law. But he's not a Christian. Okay. The objection of the scribes calling Jesus' act of forgiveness blasphemy is predicated on their assumption that Jesus is claiming divinity through this action. In other words, they're calling him blasphemous because he's saying, I have the authority to do this. Well, he's not blasphemous. And he's saying, obviously, he's saying, I have the authority. I know who I am. I'm divine. I'm not like the rest of you guys in the room. I'm God. That's what he's saying. And they all understood what he was saying. And he understood what he was saying. And there was no question about it. Hence, their emphasis that only the one God may forgive sins, to which Jesus answers in kind. The second divine figure of Daniel 7, the one like a Son of Man, is authorized to act as and for God. This constitutes a direct declaration of a doubleness of the Godhead, which is, of course, later on the very hallmark of Christian theology. Throughout the gospel, whenever Jesus claims the exousia, the authority to perform that which appears to be the prerogative of the divinity, it is the very exousia or authority of the Son of Man that is being claimed. which is to say, a scriptural authority based on a very close reading of Daniel 7. What we see now why the later rabbis, in naming this very ancient religious view a heresy, refer to it as two powers in heaven. So rabbis later began to call this two powers in heaven. There's a book written by a Jewish man called Two Powers in Heaven. The author's name is Alan Segal, S-E-G-A-L. It was his doctrine. It got turned into a book. The subtitle of it is Early Reports About Christianity and Gnosticism. So the Son of Man is Lord even of the Sabbath. The question of how to read Daniel 7 was very much on the minds of the Jews of the period. And not only those who became the followers of Jesus. Everybody's wondering, how do you read Daniel 7? This is a debate going on, he's saying. Okay, let's go over to page 60. We're moving along. I gave you Mark chapter 2. Right? One Sabbath, as he was going through the grain fields, as they made their way, his disciples began to pluck heads of grain. And the Pharisees said to him, look, why are they doing what is not lawful on the Sabbath? And he said to them, have you never read what David did when he was in need and was hungry? He and those who were with him, how he entered the house of God when Abiathar was high priest, that ate the bread of presence, which is not lawful for any person but the priest to eat, and also gave it to those who were with him. And he said to them, the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath, so the Son of Man is Lord even of the Sabbath. Okay, basically, he's saying, I'm telling you how you should understand the Sabbath, and he's saying, and I have the authority to do this because I'm the Son of Man. Now, I'm going to tell you what that means, and then we'll see how he says it, but I want to just tell you so you don't get lost here. The one thing he's not saying is that the Sabbath was made, that humanity is the Lord of the Sabbath. You are not the Lord of the Sabbath. There are people that God orders executed in the Bible for breaking the Sabbath once. Once. Numbers chapter 15. A man gathers sticks on the Sabbath, either to warm himself or to cook food. And God tells Moses, kill that man. If you want to say that Jesus is saying that humanity is the Lord of the Sabbath, you don't have a clue what he's saying there in Mark 2. He's saying, no, I'm God. Therefore, I can tell you what the Sabbath really is. See the point there? Let's read on. Now, go over to page 63. We're right near the end of what we're going to do. In seeking to distinguish the radically new and un-Jewish in Jesus' preaching, I'm going to say that again. In seeking to distinguish the radically new and un-Jewish in Jesus' preaching, Christian writers have frequently read his statement that the Sabbath was made for man and not man for the Sabbath as both indicating total opposition to keeping of the Sabbath laws at all and as initiating a religion of love and not one of causality. God's got purpose. In this text, however, we shall see that the rabbis themselves held views about the Sabbath that were closely related to Jesus' own, more expansive, to be sure, views, certainly not in direct contradiction to them. He's saying Jesus didn't teach anything that was in contradiction to what the rabbis said about the Sabbath. And you can find that in the book called The Jewish Annotated New Testament, when it explains the story of Jesus' disciples doing this with the grain on the Sabbath. And they make the Jewish commentaries say Jesus and the disciples didn't violate any laws there. The idea that the disciples were violating the law, that is anti-Semitic theology. It just is. They weren't violating anything. Okay? They didn't have a clue. And they were just trying to go after Jesus. And it wasn't, you can't even say, well, because in some books it'll say, well, Jesus, they could do this because the life always takes precedence over death. They were not going to die if they didn't eat that food. Even that argument is baloney. It's total baloney. What the truth is, he's saying, I'm God. I am literally God. I'm going to tell you what this means. I have the right to tell you what it means because the Son of Man, meaning me personally, am Lord of the Sabbath. And I'm not violating the Sabbath, because if I'm teaching the wrong thing about the Sabbath, then really I'm not qualified to be the Messiah. So he's given the exact meaning. Hold on to that question, because I want to think about it. I'll finish this and then I'll come to hold that question, because we only got one more comment, which is on page 68. I think that this explanation of the connection between Mark 2:27 and 28 answers many interpretive conundrums that arise when 27 is read as a weak, humanistic statement. Something like, the Sabbath was made for man to do whatever you want. Because that is essentially what you turn it into if you say man was made, humanity, we are the Lord of the Sabbath, meaning we can do whatever we want with the Sabbath. Right? Your only option now is to say, no. What Jesus is actually saying is, I'm actually divine. So when I say the Son of Man is Lord of the Sabbath, what I'm saying is, I'm God, literally, and I'll tell you what you can do with the Sabbath. And I'm not violating the Sabbath. See the picture there? So you're not Lord of the Sabbath. I'm going to say it as directly as I know how. You have no lordship over the Sabbath. Okay? Jesus is Lord of the Sabbath. Him personally. There was a question in the back. Please. The vast majority of Jews in America are right where you're at. Okay, first, Sandra, you're asking good questions. Okay, so let's just take this outside the question of Jewishness for a moment, just totally. Say you go to a meeting and it's on women of God, women of faith, pink, whatever, and you're learning this stuff, and you're raised as a whatever, and you realize God wants something different for me. I understand I'm a lady. God wants something different for me. I understand I'm a man. Okay. So you begin to lean in and you begin to study and you begin to learn and and it's the same thing, because I'm not going to have to give account on Judgment Day for being a woman. I'm not going to have to give account on Judgment Day for being a mother. But I have a masculine identity given by God. So on Judgment Day, I will have to give account for what kind of husband I was. I will have to give account for what kind of father I was. I will have to give account for what kind of man I was. Identity demands function. If God gave me an identity, then he demands that I act accordingly. I am not the perfect man, but I am on a path. I'm learning how to be a better husband. I'm learning how to be a better father. I'm learning how to be a better man. I am not there. I am learning. And I've got to have grace on myself as I learn how to do this, because identity demands function. That's the parable of the talents. So if God gave me this identity. So now what I tell Jewish people, and I know there's quite a few in the room, what I tell Jewish people is, let's say I'm talking to Steve and Pilar. And Steve's a married man, Pilar. And Steve and I are not going to agree on all of the details of what it means to be the man of the family. We're not. But we are going to quickly agree that it means something, and it is significant. And my job as a pastor is not to turn him into a Greg Stone. My job as a pastor is to help him to become the man that he's going to have to be, because he is going to have to give account on Judgment Day, not for whether or not he's like me, but for whether or not he is the kind of man that God's called him to be. Now, that same philosophy, I've just used the gender issue. Flip it over to the Jewish issue. My job as a pastor is not to turn Stephen Dean into the kind of Jew that I am. He's going to have to give account based upon what he's been given and how he stewards it. But he is not going to give account for whether or not he was a Jew like Greg. He's got to figure this out. He's going to walk this out. Now, I have things about my life that were given to me when I was young, and I've stewarded some of them well and some of them not so well. And some aspects of my Jewishness I do well, and some aspects of my Jewishness I don't do well. But I am on a path, and I'm learning how to do better. And this really matters. And you're on a path, and you've only been given so much, and God is a very gracious God. And so what I would say is lean into God, be gracious to yourself, don't beat yourself up. If you were talking to your kid about what grace you would want them to have, let's say they goofed off in school for their first 11 years, and now they've come to the senior year in high school, what do you tell them? Well, you've totally screwed up your whole life. No, you don't say anything like that. What do you say? You say, you know what? I'm thankful. As a parent, I'm thankful that you come to this place. I'm actually really thankful. And I'm going to help you grow. And I think that's the grace you would have for your own kid. What advice would you give them? Well, take your own advice and be gracious to yourself and grow and learn and implement, develop. But you are not the same as a person who was bar mitzvahed by the president of the American Jewish Congress, because I was. You're not the same as me. And to he who much has been given, much will be required. And God says, be gracious to yourself, because I will be gracious to you. Yes, you're Jewish, pursue it. And I'll walk with you through it, just like I would walk with one of my kids. My daughter was 40 years old when she got baptized again. And I showed that video. And how many were here when I showed it? Like, I was just so thankful, right? And we read a chapter of the Bible every day. Today was 2 Chronicles chapter 2. We're just going through. We started in Genesis, right? And so I'm not beating her up. I'm just so thankful that she's growing, I'm just so thankful. She does Wordle. She likes to do Wordle. Do you know what that is? It's a game. So I do Wordle. And every day it's kind of like, I got it on the 4th try. I got it on the 3rd try. I'm just so thankful. Just have the same grace on yourself that you would expect me to have as a pastor on your kid. Do that for yourself.